Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another week of leadership and management. I'm very happy to be with you once again for week number 4. So let's get started on this week's material. So for this week, we have chapters 7 and chapters 8 from the Van Wart text. And what these two chapters focus on or talk about this week, cover this week, are leadership approaches focusing on influence. So we're going to be talking about influence and what that means in the context of leadership. And then chapter 8 is on competency-based leadership approaches. Okay, and this has all to do with why certain people seem to have that special thing, that it factor that makes them so well equipped and adapting to or flexible and being able to adapt to leadership roles and leadership positions, right? So these are the two chapters for this week. Then we have these week's videos, okay? And for this week's videos, we have the attribution theories of leadership video, which is very short. Okay, this is leaders seen through the eyes of followers. Okay, so the importance of again perception. Okay, perception and how we see a person, how followers see a leader has a great deal to do with what kind of leadership style is the most appropriate or will be the most effective, right, between that leader and that follower. Then there's gender, and gender is a very, very interesting and broad area within the leadership literature. And it's one area that I think more research needs to be conducted because, especially now, given the increase in participation of women in the workforce and also in public sector, in politics, etc. Right? We have, thankfully, right, and hopefully it'll one day lead us to a woman president, right? We hope that'll be the case one day soon. But certainly, the importance of understanding how gender can impact leadership has an impact on leadership style, and is something that we should look at and understand the differences, right? And where women have an advantage and where men perhaps have an advantage, right? So gender perspectives. And then there's strategic leadership, which we talked about strategic leadership before. When we talk about strategic leadership, we're really talking about the understanding the environment, understanding change, understanding risk, managing risk, understanding that you have to take on risk because all great leaders are those who take on risk, but it has to be risk taken, calculated, and using empirical evidence, data, right? Not just doing silly things and throwing spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks, but really being strategic by looking at all of the variables. Also, when possible, a strategic leader is one who takes into account the opinions and the input and the insight of her followers or his followers, right? Because we don't know everything, right? And those leaders who think they know everything are often not great leaders. In fact, some of them are anti-leaders or toxic leaders because they are so arrogant. They don't welcome the input and the insight and the cooperation and participation of followers and their ideas, which may be ultimately may be better than the ideas of the leader. I mean, that leadership is part that, right? Learning to and being able to be humble enough to accept others' ideas as perhaps the best course of action to take. And then there's this last one, which is social change leadership. And this one is all about how to lead social change, how to be agents for social change. Now, a caveat here, a word of caution. The idea of being a social change agent is great, and it's positive, and it's something that leaders do, because those individuals who are, for example, transformational leadership is all about change, but change for the better, change for adding value. That's why we want change. That's why we seek change. But changing just for the sake of replacing, well, that's questionable, right? And often we see that. We especially in contemporary America, we see a great deal of trying to cancel, trying to remove, trying to change things for the sake of changing because it's in vogue, or because it's the trend, or because it's popular. And so we also, as leaders, need to understand that change for the sake of change may lead to a worse status quo, or a worse new position than the one that you previously found yourself in. So it's very important that we do understand that. Okay? All right, so for this week's assignment, we have the multimedia discussion board. And for this one, it's kind of the same model, all right? So you, for this one, you can use Prezi, you can use PowerPoint, okay? So if you're using Prezi, please post the link. Do not embed the video, okay? Present the information in the following order. So what is the crisis? For this week's lesson, for this week's discussion board, you're looking at a crisis, right? For example, an active shooter or an earthquake, or an emergency situation, the water power plant, or maybe there is a terrorist threat in the water, okay, or something like that. So, looking at a crisis that could occur that would require leadership. Now, please make a note of this, or be aware that what we're looking for here is the actions of individuals, the roles of individuals, and not necessarily the role of the agency or the role of the organization, or even the management aspect, right? Remember that this is leadership, and while we assume or expect and desire that all managers be leaders, but we know from having studied leadership so far that leadership and management are not synonymous, and there are distinctions. And so it's one thing to describe a managerial process, but that doesn't necessarily describe a leadership role or a leadership process. So think about it when you are describing the role of the leader, right? In that you don't just focus and limit yourself to the technical tasks, the management tasks of controlling, directing, right? But rather the leadership tasks, which are the inspiration, motivation, directing, coaching, right? This is where the leadership element comes into play. All right. So this is your multimedia discussion board. You can, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I know some of you have, and that's great. And you guys are doing a really great job so far, and I'm very, very, very happy and pleased with the work so far. Don't forget to respond to your colleagues, okay? This is the easiest way to lose points, and yet it's the easiest way to gain points, okay? Because if you respond to your colleagues in two posts that are insightful, intuitive, go a little bit beyond just the "I liked your post" or I enjoyed your presentation, Harry. Okay, if you go beyond that, you're going to get 5 out of 5, and that means 10 out of 10 if you do both posts. Some of you maybe forget to do 2 posts. You only do 1, and you end up losing 5 points. And I really cringe because if you only post one post, there's nothing I can do. I can't give you the 5 points for free. So don't put me in that position to take points away from you, okay? So please remember to respond to your colleagues, all right? And then lastly, before we talk about the 2 concepts for this week, the Zoom rooms, okay? Continue to join these Zoom rooms. There is no Zoom room assignment for this week, but it's a great place for you to discuss leadership, to bounce off ideas from each other, to tell each other stories about leadership or when you have been in a leadership position, or maybe talk about your supervisor, or talk about a type of culture that you have in your public agency or your local government, whatever the case may be. Okay, this class, the more you discuss with others, the better you're going to understand and grasp leadership, because it has so many manifestations. Leadership does, and your colleagues can enhance your learning by illustrating leadership in different styles and different models of leadership: Hershey and Blanchard, situational leadership, transformational leadership, laissez-faire, right? Maybe you had an absent boss, okay? I've had absent bosses. I've been, had laissez-faire leaders, and I know exactly what they are and how detrimental they are to the institution. And so do take advantage of these opportunities to engage with your colleagues, and of course have fun, right? Make it fun. Tell jokes, what have you. It's always nice to get together, at least for a little bit. I wish I had more time to spend with you, and that our time zones would match better, so that I could maybe pop in there. I may be able to do that, and I know this might not benefit this class, but it will benefit future classes once I return to the United States, which will be very soon. Okay, so try and do that. Okay, try and do that as much as you can, and have fun. All right, enjoy it. All right, so let's talk about this week's topics. Right, first one is influence. Okay, influence. All right, influence is so critical in leadership that if you were to ask or try to identify a synonym for leadership, it would be influence. Okay, that is the word that best describes and encompasses and illustrates what leadership is really about. Right? If you influence somebody to do something that they would have not been able to do or would not have done without your influence, you are a leader. You have performed or engaged in a leadership action, in leadership process. You have engaged in the leadership process, okay? So influence is pretty much a synonym for leadership. Now, obviously, there's a little bit more to leadership than just influence, because influence is, while it's synonymous, it doesn't capture all of the dimensions of leadership, but it certainly is very much at the root of leadership and what we strive to be as effective leaders. So now, where does influence come from? Why is it that influence is so important, okay? Uh, how do we influence others? Why are we able to influence others? Ask yourselves these questions. Why are others able to influence us, right? Ask yourself, why am I influenced by my boss? Why am I influenced by that politician? Why am I influenced by that actor or that the priest or the pastor, okay? Uh, what is it about them that I really just can't I can't put my finger on it, but they're just great. They're just special, and I really love to listen to them. I love to listen to their sermon. I love to listen to their stories. I love to watch their movies. What is it about them, right? And it comes down to one element, and that is the source of power, okay, or power itself. Now, if this were a class on power, power is very broad topic. We can discuss power for the whole 8 weeks. And the literature has certainly discussed and studied power in many dimensions, and there's many theories, etc. But we're only going to mention it in the context of leadership. But it is an integral part of leadership. It is necessary for leadership, and it's desired for leadership. Okay, and so what are the sources of power? Okay, we have coercive power, which is the worst power to have, or the worst power to abuse and to use and to engage in, because coercive power is naturally, by nature, inherently, it's illegitimate. Okay, example, the worst example in humanity perhaps is Adolf Hitler. Okay, he is the best example of coercive power, which is power that is based on threat and violence and coercion and completely destroying the trust and a positive relationship between leader and follower. Okay, obviously, for those that were in the Nazi Party and who followed him, and certainly it was a different case, and that's why Hitler is the perfect example of a toxic leader, of an anti-leader, but he's still a leader nonetheless, because again, going back to influence, his capacity, his charm, well, his charisma, I should say, not charm, but his charisma, and his ability to speak and to convey and to create new meaning and to convince people, even though his idea was horrible and evil and right? I mean, all the negative accolades that we could possibly think of, and yet he was able to convince people and an entire nation that he was the right man to lead Germany out of the economic and social misery that it found itself after the First World War in the 1930s. So coercive power is that example, right? Adolf Hitler. Then we have reward, power source that is based on reward, at the same time reward punishment. So it's not just reward, but reward punishment. Okay, but think about it. If somebody is able to reward you, right? Think about in your own organization, in your own team, in your own place of work. Who is the person that has the ability, that has the authority, that has the power to reward you, whether that be with a promotion or with a letter of recommendation or with perhaps a new position, right? Or maybe just kind of, giving you a little bit of a preferential treatment, whatever the case may be. In organizations, there are individuals who have the power to reward, and those individuals enjoy a great deal of power. Necessarily, they hence enjoy a great deal of influence. They have a great deal of influence over their followers. All right, an example. in this picture here, I have Pete Buttigieg. Okay, now Pete Buttigieg was, if you might recall, he was a presidential candidate for the Democratic Party, and going back to the beginning of the political season, going back to the campaign, the Democratic campaign for president. You recall the Iowa caucus. Who won the Iowa caucus? It was Pete Buttigieg. Who won in New Hampshire, the New Hampshire primary? It was a tie between Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders. And then, of course, comes Super Tuesday, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, seemingly, Joe Biden wins Super Tuesday, or at least is able to reposition himself as one of the forefront candidates, right? And as time begins to pass, and as the campaign and the competition between the Democratic candidates begin to take shape with the debates, etc., right? People begin to vote, and you have the primaries, etc. And at some point, Mr. Buttigieg, who had a pretty decent standing, right, as far as votes and support, but he stepped aside. He stepped aside, and one asks, well, what led him to step aside, right? What decision, what prompted his decision to decide to end his run for the White House, or at least the nomination of the Democratic Party, and step aside? And when he steps aside, and what do you know, right? President Biden is elected. Obviously, the Democratic Party is in power, and so Pete Buttigieg, who was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, ends up with a cabinet position in the Biden administration. Now, was that a direct result of him stepping aside? No one will know, right? But if you put two and two together, at the end of the day, you might at least you can wonder, or at least you could argue, you could make the argument that his stepping aside for the good of the party was compensated by a position in the cabinet for the Biden administration. This is an example of a reward, right? Where somebody who is able to reward you for actions has a great deal of influence on you because of that ability to reward you, okay? So that's that example. Then there's the expert, okay? Expert source of power. And this one is very important, and often it goes unnoticed, or even sometimes it's not thought of as a source of power, because many times the individuals who enjoy this source of power are not the most charismatic individuals. Case in point, Dr. John Nash here, the great mathematician, economist. You might recall the movie A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe and Jennifer Connelly. It was based on the life of John Nash. And John Nash is responsible for tremendous theories in economics. The most famous is the Nash equilibrium, okay, which is used in game theory applications and negotiations, bargaining. It's an extension of the bargaining problem. So John Nash was an extremely influential individual, not only in economics and in higher education, but also outside of higher education in the areas of business and finance and politics. His Nash equilibrium continues today to be used and influences people's decision making throughout the world in all arenas. Okay, his charisma, if you will, or his power came about from his expertise, his knowledge, his intellect, his genius, okay? And, and it is a source of power. At the end of the day, people want to follow those that know what they're talking about, right? You don't want to follow somebody that has no clue, right? You want to follow somebody that knows what she is talking about or he is talking about. And then the last one is referent source of power, okay? The referent leader, okay? And who is the referent leader? Well, the referent leader is somebody who you look up to, who you admire, and who is admired by many in her profession, his discipline, his area of employment. Case here, an example here is the actor Morgan Freeman, considered by many or respected by many inside of Hollywood, but more importantly outside of Hollywood. A man that has a long and illustrious acting career. Has his roles are legendary. His roles are epic. Some of the great movies of the last 20 years have Morgan Freeman, right? He's greatly respected, and so he enjoys that referent power because people look up to him, people admire him, people respect him, and because they do so, whatever comes out of his mouth is influential. Okay, so that's these are the 5 sources of power. Okay, a couple of more things I want to say about power. Okay, power is often given a negative connotation. Okay, when we think about power, in fact, if you think about the first thing that comes to mind right now, I'll give you a few seconds. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think about power? It could be a person, it could be a position, it could be something else. But what's the first thing? Okay, so now you've thought about that. Well, chances are it's probably in a negative context. The person is probably somebody that you don't necessarily like, or you find that this person was abusive or abused her power or his power, okay? But often power is given a negative connotation, and that's unfair because power hasn't done anything to harm you. Power is positive. Power is good. The problem with power is when it's used for the wrong reasons, when it's abused, when it's illegitimate, when it's coercive, okay? But power in and of itself is a necessary element for organizations to be able to achieve their objective. No organization, public, private, nonprofit, will be able to achieve its mission and achieve its objectives and succeed in whatever it does if there isn't a power structure within the organization. Okay? So power is a necessary condition for success in organizations. All right. Lord Acton, remember Lord Acton's famous line, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." Well, in this sense, in the context of Lord Acton's quote, power is bad because it's absolute power, right? If you think about our American system of government, what do we have? What are the fundamental? If you think about the Constitution, what fundamentally limits power? Our American government is all about limited power. Okay, limited government, limited power. The federal government, right? The power of the federal government is limited by the power of the states, and vice versa. The power of the executive is limited by the judiciary and the legislative. These are the checks and balances that are inherent in our American system of government and the Constitution. So they ensure that American governmental power remains legitimate. unfortunately not the case in other countries, especially countries that are under dictatorial or totalitarian regimes, which have absolutely no checks and balances, and thus the power and the sources of power are illegitimate. Okay, so this is influence. Now, attribution theories of leadership. Okay, what are attribution theories of leadership? Well, attribution theory recognizes that leadership is as much defined by expectations as it is by specific behaviors and performance. Okay, there's been many studies about human behavior and expectations, right? There was Hawthorne studies conducted in the 1970s, and then copies or replicas of that same Hawthorne studies conducted in higher ed and in other researchers. Basically, there's the idea of group dynamics, and why is it that people react or act in certain ways. Some people, for example, might go with the flow, right? They might abandon their own integrity, their own morals, because they don't want to be chastised or cast out by the majority. They don't want to be the only person that thinks that action A is right or action A is wrong. So they simply say, you know what, I don't want to be the only person to say otherwise, so I'm just going to go with the flow and let it be. Okay, and so it's called groupthink. Okay, groupthink, not to be confused with thinking collectively, because thinking collectively is positive. Groupthink is not positive. It can lead to very, very bad consequences, and even tragic consequences. Okay, so groupthink is, but it's driven by expectations. Okay, it's defined by expectations. When the minute that we expect something to happen, or we expect people to act a certain way or perceive us in a certain way, we change our behavior. Okay, and expectations then have a tremendous impact on how we behave. Okay, so the attribution theories recognize that leadership is a function of expectations. It is a product of expectations. Okay, and these expectations drive behavior. They affect behavior and consequently drive performance. Okay, so what are these factors that we're talking about? Well, we're talking about cultural factors or cultural cognitive factors. Okay, for example, cultural frames. All right, every culture has its own frame of behavior, things that are expected, things that are that society finds okay or approves or disapproves. Okay, they could be frames that go back many years of just the way things are done. These could be practices, these could be formal practices in government and business, as well as informal practices. So these are the cultural frames. Then there's, of course, religion, political philosophy, government systems. All right, those countries that have historically been lived under totalitarian regimes are going to behave differently than those that are democratic, because expectations are different. Okay, and then the last one here is very important, and that's adherence and respect for law and order. And this is very important, especially when you are having to work with individuals from other cultures and other countries where law and order are not respected. And so when you live under these conditions where there is no law, there is no order, there are no protections from the state, people end up taking law into their own hands. You end up with what Hobbes called the Leviathan, right? The existence was nasty, brutish, and short. It's like the state of nature. There are no laws, there are no limits, there are no protections. You are pretty much on your own. Okay, and so when when you have to live under this type of a system, when you grow up under the system, when you have to survive under the system, it's like the law of the street, okay, or the law of the barrio, okay. If you have to survive in any way that you can, then that's going to dictate your perception of people and people's actions, and how much you can trust, and how much whether you act or behave ethically or not, right? So adherence to law and order are certainly important drivers. It also has to do with whether your society is collectivist or individualist, okay? United States of America, U.S. society is very much an individualist society. Nothing wrong with it, absolutely. There are pros, there are cons of both styles, or both frames. But the U.S. is very individualistic. Usually, you will find very collectivist cultures and societies in the Asian countries, Japan, China, the Middle East. Okay, and I apologize here, I misspelled Middle Eastern. Okay, I apologize for that. But the Asian and the Middle Eastern cultures very much collective, as opposed to the West. The West is very individualistic, and this frame will impact how you perceive problems and how you solve problems, okay? Because again, depending on what you have been accustomed to will determine what kinds of solutions you are going to ultimately implement. And then lastly, you have power distance, okay? Is your culture, because the book also touches upon the importance of culture in leadership. Are you a leader that is accustomed to a system that is based on merit? Is punishment and reward merit-based, or is it the product of who you know, right? Influences and right. If you are in countries in Latin America, if you are the son of a very wealthy person or high government official, and you get caught drinking and driving, the cops stop you, and these kids have a special card from daddy or a number or whatever, and they simply give the number or the card to the police officer, and that's it. No harm, no foul. Okay, so this is the way it works, unfortunately, in many countries throughout the world that have these types of systems, right? Plutocracy, corruption, the patron-client type systems, as opposed to countries like the U.S., which, not to say that there isn't at some level, and for some people there is obviously some of the plutocracy, right? The very rich, the power barons at the top, right? Very powerful people in the U.S. and other countries in Europe, etc. But in general terms, there's, because of the democratic system that is in place, there is much more of a merit-based system of punishment and reward in the U.S. That consequently drives behavior and affects expectations about leadership. And then last but not least, uncertainty avoidance, right? And what appetite for risk do we have? This, of course, is different in every country. There are countries that welcome risk, are risk-loving, risk-taking. There are other countries where risk is something that should be controlled, and so you have systems in place to mitigate that. That will also have an impact on your leadership style, right? Or if you are a really risk-adverse individual, and you go to a country where risk is something that is required or a necessity for leadership, then chances are you are going to be perceived as somebody that's weak, right? On the other hand, if you are a risk-loving individual who likes to take on risk and likes to gamble on the higher risk, higher return financial portfolio, for example, you might be seen as reckless by individuals who frown upon risk or who are risk averse, right? So this is an important factor to consider. Lastly, I just wanted to say, in case you don't recognize some of the individuals here, I wanted to mention that the importance of gender and leadership, as I did, right? But here you have these four women that I have here. If you don't know who they are, they have all been presidents. They have all been presidents of Latin American countries. And why do I bring this up? Well, because there is a perception about Latin America that Latin Americans are chauvinistic. In fact, the concept of machismo, which is very prominent, very prevalent in Latin American society. It's the male chauvinism, right? Unfortunately, it is a big part of Hispanic and Latin American culture. But ironically, Latin America has enjoyed the opportunity for much more participation of women in the highest offices in their countries, and has had several, not just these four, but several other presidents, female presidents, women presidents. So I did want to bring that up, that perhaps it's a sign of the times are changing, or it may be due to other factors. Again, leadership is complex, so one does wonder how this happens, right? How can you have a culture that is very chauvinistic, right? And may not consider women to be apt to be the leader of a country, but yet has had does elect women presidents, right? More so than other places around the world, which are supposedly, right, at least in theory, much more open and diverse and gender diverse, right? Or gender inclusive, I should say. So, and then Mr. Churchill here, I did have him in here because if we're talking about expectations and Winston Churchill was a war prime minister, and he replaced Neville Chamberlain, and there was a great deal of resistance with Prime Minister Churchill, even with people from his own party, and so he had to fight, he had to battle expectations throughout his tenure, but especially at the beginning. And it wasn't only until the end and the victory of the Allies, and of course the defeat of the Hitler and the Axis powers, that Churchill really became or took on that role as one of the great leaders in the 20th century, right? So it's kind of a story of where history and the way it unfolded kind of made Churchill and placed him at such a very prestigious position as one of the great leaders. But it wasn't so during the time that he was prime minister. Okay, expectations of him were far different. Okay, so that's what we have for this week. I hope you have enjoyed this conversation, this lecture. I wanted to leave you with this message, this passage from Samuel that kind of speaks to the importance of not being led or misled, I should say. The idea of the false prophet, right? We shouldn't allow perception or what we see or what we think is true. And just because a person is pretty or handsome or speaks eloquently or what have you, these are important attributes to have. But we should really be, as followers, it is our role, and as Christians, our obligation to really get to know the heart of the person, okay? Because that's where we are going to really understand and know what that person is all about and what kind of leader she or he is, right? So, because there's pretty faces, there's eloquent speakers, there's charming folks out there, and even people that are influential and have a lot of power, a lot of money, etc. And sometimes people get carried away, right? And so that's kind of the message that I want to leave you with here. Not to be led by just what you see at first value, but the importance of seeking out what's at the heart of an individual. Okay. All right, folks. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to my presentation this week. And as always, I wish you the very best, and God bless you all. Thank you.